Have you ever wondered what really happens in that exact moment between life and death? When the world fades, sound vanishes, and all that remains is silence. Does consciousness simply fade, or awaken to something much greater? For 20 years I have carried a truth I never intended to hide. A truth that began on one of the darkest days in human history, September 11th, 2001. That morning, I wasn't thinking about heaven or hell. I was just another man on my way to work in one of the Twin Towers, surrounded by voices, routines, and the illusion that tomorrow was certain. But when the impact shook the building, everything changed. The ground shook, windows exploded, the air filled with smoke and screams. I remember the heat, the desperation, the metallic taste of fear, and then nothing. No sound, no pain, just a deep, absolute silence. It was then that I realized I was no longer in my body. I saw it from above, motionless amidst the wreckage. Science would call it an out-of-body experiment, the result of oxygen deprivation or neurological collapse. But what happened next cannot be explained by any medical textbook. A light, more intense than fire, softer than wind, began to grow within the darkness. It didn't blind me. It recognized me. And within it, something waited for me. Something that would reveal the truth humanity had forgotten for 20 years. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath. Because what follows isn't just a story about death. It's about what exists beyond it. What I saw in that light was not a religious vision, nor an illusion of the mind. It was something that touched the very essence of human consciousness. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about life, time, and truth. And that's why, after 20 years of silence, I decided to tell what really happened. But before I continue, I want you to be part of this journey with me. Every word you hear here was built to make you feel, think, and remember that there is something much larger watching us, something that may have always been trying to communicate with us. If you believe that consciousness goes beyond the body, or even if you doubt it, I want to know, what do you believe happens after death? Leave your comment below. Write, survives. If you believe that consciousness survives, this not only helps the channel grow, but also creates a current of people who, like you, are trying to understand the inexplicable. And if this story has already given you goosebumps, if it has made you question or feel something different, leave your like now. This shows that this type of content has meaning. Subscribe in the channel and activate the bell, because the next stories will take you even deeper, to the place where science and spirit meet. I never thought a simple radio call could split my life in two. Alpha 4, people trapped on the 30th floor, possible partial collapse. The dispatcher's voice sounded metallic, distant, and yet each syllable weighed more than the oxygen tank on my back. I've been a firefighter for 20 years. I've seen flames that looked like living monsters, smoke that engulfed entire cities, but nothing prepared me for that day. The building burned like a concrete torch. Windows burst in succession, spewing glass and embers that floated like inverted stars. Each step I climbed was a negotiation between courage and fear. The air was thick, too hot to breathe. When I reached the 25th floor, I heard a sharp sound, the metallic scream of the structure giving way. It was then that I saw the face of a woman covered in soot, holding a child to her chest. "They're up there," she cried, pointing. I just waved. In moments like these, there's no time to think about statistics or probabilities. There's only the next step. As he ascended, the smoke grew thicker. The heat was an invisible wall pushing me down. The mask's display began to fog up, and the sound of my own heartbeat mingled with the motion. Detector's alarm. 5 more floors. I repeated to myself like a mantra. 5 more floors and everything will be fine. On the 30th, the ceiling began to cave in. I remember yelling for the others to get out. I remember the flash, the sharp impact, the pain, and then nothing. The silence that followed was impossible. A heavy silence, as if the world had stopped to hold its breath. When I opened my eyes, the smoke had disappeared. I was still on the same floor, but the air was clear, cold, clean. My companions were gone. Nor was the weight of the equipment, nor was the heat. At first, I thought it was a dream brought on by the fainting spell, but then I saw something that paralyzed me. My own body lying motionless among the rubble. The hoses spurted water over me like silver snakes, and a team tried to revive the body that I knew was mine. Science says this kind of experience is the result of a lack of oxygen, of the mind projecting images as the brain begins to shut down. I believed this too for many years, but in that moment I was there, conscious, observing every detail with impossible clarity. I saw the dust particles suspended in the air, heard the distant sound of sirens, felt the vibration of the collapsing building, and above all, I felt a presence. It was as if the space around me was alive. A light began to form before me, not from outside, but springing from within the darkness itself. It was soft, golden, and pulsed as if breathing. It wasn't a lamp, nor fire, nor reflection. It was something calling my name without words. A mixture of fear and peace filled me. I tried to look back. I saw the paramedics struggling. I saw the desperation in their eyes, and yet something inside me knew I couldn't go back. The light expanded, and the longer I stared at it, the more I felt it knew me. I don't know how long I stood there. Time was meaningless. Every memory of my life passed in fragments. The first rescue, the birth of my daughter, the smell of coffee before the morning shift. Everything jumbled together, everything was present. Suddenly the ground disappeared. I was floating in a directionless space, surrounded by this living luminosity. And it was there, on this threshold, that I understood that this wasn't just light. It was consciousness, an immense, silent, welcoming intelligence. It didn't speak, but every thought that arose within me was answered before it even formed. "You've always been here," she seemed to say. "You just forgot." I felt a shiver that didn't come from my body because I no longer had a body. It was pure sensation, pure attention. At every moment I understood that I was being shown something humans had forgotten, or perhaps chosen not to see. And even without understanding, I agreed to follow. The luminosity enveloped me completely, and suddenly I was standing before an immense field of moving energy. It was like looking into the fabric of the universe itself. Golden threads, intertwining, forming breathing patterns. Within these patterns I saw stories, memories, lives. I saw pain, love, choices, all connected by an invisible thread. As I watched, I realized that this place held no judgment. Nothing there was punishment or reward. It was pure revelation, the truth about who we are when fire, fear, and flesh cease to exist. Then, for the first time, I felt something, or someone, approach. A presence more intense than all the others. And the instant it revealed itself, the surrounding light seemed to bend before it. The presence advanced like a horizon that approaches when you run, at once far away, and suddenly, absolutely here. It had no face, no defined form, but I recognized it with a certainty I hadn't learned from any book. It was the source of the brightness that had called me by name since before my first memory. When it opened, I didn't see a figure. I saw an understanding. It was as if invisible folds unfolded, and between them, truth breathed. I wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the question was dissolved by a silent answer that pierced me completely. "I am what you always sought when you ran toward the fire, the part of you that never burned." I felt I could stay there forever, and the always in that place wasn't made of minutes. It was made of presence, consciousness, mine, the universe's, the one that held the light, began to stitch together images and sensations that weren't isolated memories, but pieces of a network. First came scenes from the fire, as if I were seeing them through time. The creaking of cables, the protesting metal, the soot dancing like dark snow. Then the line retreated to much earlier, fitting into other lines. A child opening the window in a stuffy apartment. My mother calling me inside because lightning is no joke. An elderly man holding my hand in the first instance of life slipping away. And I was still too young to understand that no one holds what needs to go. I realized that the light didn't show me the past. It revealed the connections. Nothing happened alone. Each gesture was a stone thrown into a lake I had never seen whole. Now I saw the ripples. The waves were pale gold. They were coming out of me when I offered water to a stranger in a hospital corridor years ago. They were also coming out when I stubbornly turned my face away in an argument with my father. The light neither celebrated nor condemned. It showed. And in showing, I understood that each choice creates a field. Around it, an invisible climate that touches other people, that touches other choices. The hidden truth was not a formula. It was the map of consequences. And why hidden? Because in the rush of everyday life, we live as if stones didn't make waves, as if lakes didn't exist, as if what we think and feel were a secret kept in the mind safe. But there were no safes there. There was transparency. Where attention goes, that grows. Where attention is absent, what is alive withers. Simple, inconvenient, transformative. The presence seemed to widen my focus and led me down a corridor that wasn't space. It was meaning. On one side, I saw images that shone with a clarity marked by care. Hands held in hallways, neighbors sharing a meal, small decisions that shorten vast distances. On the other, I saw the news of the soul, fear feeding fear, and fear wearing respectable masks, haste, sarcasm, the need to be right all the time. Fear creates tunnels where light doesn't penetrate, not because it can't, but because attention has built walls. And when attention builds walls, we call reality what is merely habit. The presence brought me to a point that felt like a threshold, not a door, not a border, but a shift in density. Before crossing it, something pulled me, not longing for my body, but the thread of the people who bore my name on earth. It was a small, insistent, human call. I heard the vibration of a voice I knew. My daughter. She wasn't there, obviously, but in the, language of that light, intention becomes sound. Love becomes direction. The presence noticed my deviation and didn't stop me. Instead, it widened the space so I could look down. And as I looked down, I saw a scene that was both near and far. A hospital corridor. The details emerged effortlessly. A digital clock with 2 blinking dots marking hours that meant little. A keep door closed sign partially covered by tape. The floor pattern with a gap that formed a sort of comma. And, near the ceiling, a small, forgotten label on a ventilation grate, with numbers I would later recite as if revealing a secret. 143B. I floated at the height of the light fixtures. From my position, I could see the bed where my body lay connected to monitors, listened to by hands that carried weariness and professionalism. I saw a nurse with a low bun, a rebelliously loose strand brushing her neck, a turquoise necklace contrasting with the white of her uniform. She balanced a clipboard, a glass of water, and a pen. The pen fell. It hit the bed rail, bounced, and disappeared beneath the equipment with a discreet clang. "I'll get it later," she said, not realizing she was alone. The simple phrase was etched like a blue pin into the fabric of experience. I thought I should go down, let them know I was there. Alive in some sense. I tried to make a gesture, reach out to someone, but that wasn't how communication worked. Language was attention, and recognition came when the frequency of attention was adjusted. I remembered something I'd studied one sleepless night. The brain, during extreme experiences, can trigger REM-like states outside of sleep, blending perception and memory. That didn't explain everything, but it touched on the edge of the phenomenon, like the skin of an enormous fruit that I was finally experiencing in its entirety. The core was something else. Lucidity without a body, consciousness without constraints, a clarity impossible through the ordinary pathway of the physical. Senses. The presence approached again, like someone gently picking up a child who has wandered off to the side of the street. Humans ask, "What is real?" when pain surprises them. It whispered soundlessly. But attention is the measure of reality. You create a passage for what you nourish with focus. There was tenderness in that teaching. It wasn't a speech. It was flight guidance. Suddenly the corridor dissolved, and where walls once stood, a shimmering field now stretched. Within it, forms of language and emotion intertwined like constellations that draw stories before an astronomer can name them. That was when the revision began. Not a chronological collage, but a choreography of meanings. I relived the afternoon when, tired and irritated, I had responded curtly to the girl at the base reception. The film zoomed in on the scene and took me to the other side, her returning home more exhausted than when she left, delaying her conversation with her mother, missing by minutes their last phone call. The waves of my harshness wouldn't stop within me. They leaped. Now I saw the stones. Next, I saw the small gesture I once considered nothing. A glass of water offered to a young man trembling on the emergency room bench. The water wasn't water. It was validation. The wave crashed against the shore of his life and, subtly, altered his next decision. This didn't make him a saint, nor did it transform me into a hero, but it changed the climate of a microcosm, and this microcosm touched others. I realized that the review neither rewarded nor punished. It taught us to see. I understood that there is an economy of attention, a secret budget that defines which inner worlds flourish, that of patience or that of resentment, that of presence or that of escape. At the height of this understanding, the presence delivered a phrase to me. It didn't come as a loud epiphany. It came like water entering a vessel that was already ready. What you feed grows and measures you. I felt land in the center of what I was, not as an order but as a simple law, without adjectives, without dogma, a fact of the fabric of consciousness. Then a crossroads appeared that wasn't a physical fork. It was an invitation. On one side, the luminous expanse that promised to unfold ever more layers of that patient knowledge, not a promise of paradise, but the continuation of a literacy of the soul. On the other, a denser beam, similar to a bridge, that led back to the density of the flesh, to the friction of time, to the slow learning we call life. I felt the bridge vibrate with names. My daughter, my teammate, my neighbor who always left me vegetables from the garden at my doorstep, and even the colleague I'd argued with the week before. None of these names asked. All offered direction. Their presence didn't push. It simply illuminated. Choosing is also teaching. Before I could decide, the field opened up another scene, the most intimate. I, a boy, hidden under the table, listening to my parents fight. The echo of that fear silently shaped my quest for control, my need to get there first, to save everyone, to not fail. The fire gave me a language for this ancient desire, to burn away fear, to learn to cross over. And the presence, in that clarity, showed me another way. It's not the fear you extinguish. It's the attention you withdraw from it. Fear, without nourishment, loses volume. Courage is not the opposite of fear. It's the gaze that doesn't feed it. There I made my only break with you who are listening to me now. If at any point in your life you felt that the waves of your choices were invisible, know this: they exist. Maybe someone you don't even know is breathing a little easier today because of a gesture of yours that you've already forgotten. And maybe you yourself are carrying weights that just need a different focus to lose their hunger. I'm not asking you for blind faith. I'm inviting you to experience the shifting of attention. For a minute, for a day. Observe what grows. Observe what withers. The language of light has stayed with me like a simple phrase. Attention is destiny. The presence welcomed this surrender and in response took me back to the hospital for a moment, like someone driving a verification stake into the ground of the world. More details: a cleaning cart stuck in a gap in the door, a yellow sticker with an umbrella design on a supply cabinet, the heart monitor emitting a beep that strangely resembled a musical note. The nurse with the blue collar returned, fumbled for her pen, sighed, and called the name of a doctor who brought a small flashlight and the same patience that saves lives millimeter by millimeter. I recorded everything because I sensed that, if I returned, I would need these anchors, not to prove to the world. Proof often only fuels dispute, but to align my own axis in case they tried to call delirium what deep down I knew had been an encounter. The review then shifted in tone, like a film's soundtrack shifting from drama to genrelessness. I was led to glimpse a kind of memory that wasn't mine, but in which I was included. Cities from different decades, hands building and destroying, eyes waiting and forgetting. I saw how entire cultures grow when their stories are told with an eye toward empathy. I saw how they shrink when attention slips into cynicism. It wasn't a moral lesson. It was consciousness building. Where you water, something sprouts. Where you drain, something dries. Presence summed it up, this time in 3 words that felt like seeds. Choose, water, harvest. The scenes were simultaneously suffocating and relieving. I recognized patterns in myself and others, and recognition, curiously, didn't bring shame. It brought opportunity. I saw myself standing before my aging father, his tantrums mirroring my own, and I realized how much I fueled this dance for fear of seeing him fragile. I saw myself with my daughter, sometimes fixing too many things when she only wanted attention that didn't fix anything. I saw myself in the hallways where classmates made jokes to make death bearable, and I understood that humor is also attention, and that it can open windows when it doesn't blow out candles. I needed to choose. The side of expansion called to me with the tenderness of what doesn't demand, the bridge with the urgency of what still needs to be done. And like every true choice, there was no celestial announcement or contract. There was only coherence with what the light had already shown me. What I fed would grow and measure me. If I fed escape, I would reap escape. If I fed presence, I would reap presence. I turned to the bridge and, before crossing it, asked for something I didn't know I could ask for. Give me a phrase that will remind me of this when gravity pulls me toward oblivion. Presence, generous, responded. Where your attention rests, there your time will be born. I guarded it like one who guards fire in a pot. The return wasn't a fall, it was a fitting. First came the sound, a sound of cold rubber against metal, then a weight in my chest that wasn't pain but density. Finally, the edges of my body once again delimiting the experience. The air returned harsh, the smells returned strong, the world returned angular. I felt hands pressing, voices coordinating, and I found myself between the edge and the shore, breathing little and yet breathing. The monitor drew a timid mountain and someone said, "We have rhythm." I couldn't open my eyes, but I was there, inhabiting once again what was mine. The next morning and morning again made sense. A lady cleaning the hallway with her cart locked smiled at me from behind a mask. The yellow umbrella sticker was on the same locker. The nurse with the turquoise necklace came in, touched my shoulder, and before checking the signs, bent down to pick up a pen. She said she lost yesterday and no one found. The number 143B flashed on a shelf above the windowsill. Small. Confirmations pressed against the larger one. I'd returned with more than memories. I'd returned with a measure. In the days that followed, the city continued its noise, the sirens continued to answer the call, and the news continued to dwell on what we call urgent. I understood. Life has a way of pushing people and asking them to choose quickly, but I now knew another temporality, and it required a delicate discipline, observing where my attention landed before swearing, "I can't." When fear arose, and it did, sometimes very convincingly, I remembered the phrase as if touching a simple amulet. Where your attention rests, there your time will be born. Instead of nurturing it, I let it pass like a cloud that knows it doesn't own the sky. I won't sugarcoat it. Going back hurts. It hurts because the body is a school and the skin is a notebook. But the pain took on a new meaning, and each twinge seemed to ask me, "What do you want to water?" Sometimes I still watered with haste. Sometimes with patience. And the results didn't take long to emerge, as if the universe had gained more shortcuts to return learning to me in real time. One afternoon, I ran into the colleague I'd argued with. He began the old routine, and I almost joined in. Almost. I held my pace, shook off the simmering resentment for a second, and watched the stage rearrange the chairs. He lost his urge to be right, and in the void left by my silence, confessed the fear he'd been carrying since the last incident. It wasn't cinematic illumination. It was human. It was enough. If you've followed me this far, you know I'm not finished with this story. I still need to tell you about the moment the light placed me at the final crossroads and the sentence I received at the limit, the one that brought me back with a simple yet demanding mission. I still need to tell you how I quietly tested the anchors of the hospital corridor, and how this test prevented me from treating the greatest encounter of my life as a passing delusion. Above all, I need to walk with you through the details of a life reorganized from a humble principle. Attention is destiny. Before we move on, I want to hear from you, once, objectively. If any part of this experience sparked in you the feeling that waves exist and that choices are pebbles in invisible lakes, let me know in the comments with a word that will serve as a beacon for the next chapter. Survives. If something made you uncomfortable or curious, write it down. Attention is destiny. And tell me what scene has been lingering in your mind. This sharpens our conversation, keeps this space alive, and shows me that it makes sense to continue expanding this story right where we left off. Because it's from there, from the threshold between the light and the bridge, that we continue. It was from there, from the threshold between the light and the bridge, that I followed. For days, perhaps weeks, I experienced a kind of silent transition. The world seemed the same, but something inside me had reorganized. The colors were sharper, yet fragile, as if every detail might dissolve if I stopped looking. Even the sound of the wind seemed to breathe, carrying intentions that had previously eluded me. The people around me thought I was simply recovering from the trauma. Perhaps they were right, but not in the sense they imagined. What they called trauma, I called an echo. The light still accompanied me, discreetly, like a reflection that refused to fade. Sometimes at night, when the hospital slept and the machines marked time with their electronic signals, I would close my eyes and see the golden glow move behind my eyelids. It wasn't a dream or a delirium. It was a memory, and the memory had a life of its own. One of those early mornings, a nurse left the radio on, and an old song drifted down the hallway. It was a song my mother used to sing when I was a child. The notes spread through the air as if they recognized me, and something inside me broke. The light returned, not as a vision but as a presence. I understood that what we call spirit does not dwell above us, but within the memories we cherish. Every memory is a window to the eternal, and every simple gesture carries the signature of the invisible. When I finally returned home, I realized that nothing was the same. The street, the people, the everyday noise, everything was intact, yet profoundly altered. I walked around feeling the world watching me back. Every glance, every movement was a silent reminder that life is a constant dialogue between what we see and what we choose to perceive. For weeks I tried to live as before, but it was impossible. Things that once seemed urgent lost their weight. Hurrying no longer made sense. I found myself pausing in front of storefronts, trees, strangers. I watched and felt something move between us. An invisible thread, the same fabric I had seen in the light. I realized that humanity is lost not through ignorance, but through distraction. The truth is hidden not behind mystery, but behind habit. That night I began to write. The words came on their own, as if someone were breathing them. I tried to capture everything, the sound, the glow, the phrases, the details. And the more I wrote, the more I realized that what the light showed me was not a divine message, but a collective memory. We forget who we are because we stop paying attention to what connects us. Consciousness never disappears. It just changes form. One morning, one of the doctors told me I'd been pulseless for 4.5 minutes. He shook his head, intrigued, saying it was a miracle I was conscious, without any after effects. I smiled, not out of arrogance, but out of gratitude. A miracle isn't the impossible. It's the reconnection with what's essential. The following days were filled with rediscovery. The sound of the sirens, the smell of coffee, the texture of the hands shaking mine. Everything seemed charged with an ancient force. I began to understand that the light wasn't in another world. It permeated this one all the time. It was the same glow that lives in the cracks of a window at dawn, in the laughter that bursts forth for no reason, in the forgiveness that arrives without explanation. I came to see life as an extension of that consciousness. There is no real separation between the body and what animates it. We are a line of attention moving within something much larger. And when we forget this, the world narrows, hardens, and becomes sick. But when we remember, even for a moment, everything expands again. There was a moment as the sun streamed through my living room window when I realized the light outside was identical to the one I'd found beyond death. The difference was that now it was within me, and I could recognize it. This was what humanity had forgotten. We don't need to go all the way to find the divine. The divine is in every conscious breath, in every look that truly sees, in every life that chooses to return and remain awake. In the days that followed, I realized that the real challenge wasn't returning. It was staying awake. The lucidity that had accompanied me since the hospital was a gift, but also a burden. I saw the world with an almost painful clarity. People hurried past, immersed in conversations about deadlines, bills, news, and I could feel the field vibrating around them. Small storms of anxiety and desire, like electric echoes colliding. It wasn't judgment. It was compassion. I recognized in them what had once been in me, the sleep of consciousness. At work, I tried to hide my feelings. I returned to the barracks with the same uniform, the same helmet, the same jokes. On the outside, I was the same man. On the inside, everything was ruin and reconstruction. When the siren blared, I felt a mixture of adrenaline and reverence. Each call was a reminder of the fragility of everything. Going into a fire was no longer just doing one's duty. It was stepping through the mirror, facing the fire as a metaphor, the fire outside reflecting the fire within. In one such incident, an old house caught fire after a short circuit. As we helped evacuate the residents, I saw a little girl clinging to a cat, frozen in the middle of the hallway. The ceiling was beginning to creak, the temperature rising rapidly. I yelled for her to run, but she wouldn't move. That's when, without thinking, I whispered, "Look at me. The light is with us." She blinked hesitantly, and for an instant I saw the reflection of the golden light in her eyes, the same glow. I scooped her up in my arms and ran, and as we walked through the door, the ceiling collapsed behind us with a crash. Outside, she was crying, but her cries held something different. It wasn't just fear, it was release. I felt the same. The light didn't save us. She simply remembered us. From that day on, something began to repeat itself. Small, subtle coincidences, as if the universe were breathing along with. Once I stopped my truck at a light and looked out the window. A weary-looking man was crossing the street, carrying a bouquet of wilted flowers. On impulse, I rolled down the window and said, "Beautiful." He stopped, surprised, and replied, "They were for my mother. I buried her today." We were silent for a second, and in that second I felt the field align. No big words, no sermons, just presence. And again, the same warmth of light. I began to understand what she meant when she showed the waves. Every human interaction is an echo that traverses dimensions. There are no random encounters. Everything we touch, even a glance, leaves an impression on the fabric of reality. When we forget this, the world hardens. When we remember, it breathes. The nights were different now. I dreamed of hospital corridors, but also of impossible landscapes. Luminous forests, cities made of sound, singing rivers. Sometimes I woke with tears in my eyes and the feeling that someone was still watching me, patiently. The presence never completely disappeared, it simply changed form. Sometimes it came as silence, sometimes as intuition, sometimes as a simple flash amidst the routine. I began to note these signs. I called them breaths of light. A leaf falling slowly, a clock stopping at the same time, a child laughing to itself. They were subtle reminders that there is an invisible side sustaining the visible. I learned to see the world as a two-sided mirror. On one, chaos. On the other, harmony. That never breaks even when it seems to disappear. Some colleagues began to notice the change. One of them, who had known me for years, said one day, "You look different. You seem too calm." I just smiled. How could I explain? The fire I carried now was different. It didn't burn to destroy, it illuminated to understand. One day I was called to visit an old partner who was ill. He had suffered smoke inhalation during a rescue operation and was slowly recovering. Sitting next to him, I heard the usual confession, "We give our lives for everyone, but no one remembers later." I replied with a serenity that surprised me. Maybe the problem is wanting to be remembered. The flame exists to be lit, not to be applauded. He was silent for a moment, and when he looked at me, there were tears. I didn't need to say anything else. Sometimes the truth just needs to be remembered, not defended. I walked home that night, feeling the city pulsate, the lights of the buildings reflected in the puddles, and for a moment it seemed as if the sky had descended to the ground. I walked slowly, listening to my own footsteps, thinking about everything the light had shown me. That reality doesn't end where flesh ends. That consciousness isn't a prisoner of matter. It is what gives it form. The world is still full of pain, yes, but the difference is that now I understand pain as a language. Every loss, every void, is a cry for attention. When pain is heard, it transforms. When it is ignored, it repeats itself. Over time, I realized that my purpose was not to tell what I saw, but to live what I learned. The light didn't ask me to convince anyone, only to remember and act accordingly. Therefore, each day is a translation, from the invisible to the visible, from the eternal to the instant. I'm still a firefighter. I still go into fires. I still feel fear. But now I know that fear is just the echo of the reminder that we are fragile. And fire, ironically, is the teacher that teaches us most about the value of life. Sometimes in the heat of an operation, I hear a crack, a scream, and my heart races. It's in that moment that I remember, where your attention rests, there your time will be born. And so, even within the chaos, I choose to land in the light. Years passed. The world continued to change, the streets filled with new faces and sounds. But for me, time continued with a different rhythm. Each day felt like an echo of the same moment I saw the light, a moment that stretched into all things. I returned to my routine, but the routine was no longer routine. It was prayer disguised as everyday life. One autumn morning, I woke before dawn. There was a serene chill in the air, the kind of chill that heralds farewells and new beginnings. I donned my uniform for the last time. Retirement. My body was tired, my hands scarred, but my gaze still alert, as if awaiting invisible instructions. As I adjusted my belt, I noticed something curious. That familiar weight now seemed light. I'd spent my entire life trying to extinguish other people's fires, and only then did I understand that the most indomitable flame had always been within me. I decided to walk to the site of my first calling, the building that years ago had been engulfed in flames, and where everything for me began and ended at the same time. The place had been rebuilt, new, clean, modern, but the air still carried memories. It was like returning to the scene of a dream and realizing that the dream continues to unfold, even after waking. I stood before the facade for long minutes. People hurried past. The sounds of the city echoed like a distant orchestra. And in the midst of it all, a strange sensation enveloped me. There was no longer any separation between past and present. What I saw there so many years ago was no isolated miracle. It was a reminder of how life truly works. Nothing disappears. Everything transforms. I entered the lobby and sat on a marble bench next to the stairs. The sun streamed through the glass, leaving streaks of light dancing on the floor. It was then that I noticed something. The same soft golden glow that had once greeted me on the other side now rested there, mingled with the morning light. The difference was that this time, I knew I could touch it. I closed my eyes. The sound of the city faded to a whisper. I took a deep breath. Within the silence, I felt the presence again, the same one that had once welcomed me and given me back. There were no words, but I understood everything. The truth was not hidden from humanity. It was hidden within it. We are so busy trying to reach the eternal that we forget that the eternal permeates us in every act of kindness, in every forgiveness granted, in every conscious breath. I opened my eyes and noticed a woman on the other side of the lobby. She was trying to balance a stack of papers, a purse, and her cell phone, which kept falling. A small, everyday chaos. I got up and held the door for her. She thanked me, without looking at me, and continued on. Nothing extraordinary, but as she passed, a ray of light reflected off the metal frame, and for a second, the entire lobby was filled with that antique gold. It was brief, but enough. I felt my heart beat differently, not racing, just alive, and I realized I no longer needed to search for the light. I had brought it with me. It was in the simple gesture, in the present moment, in the gaze that sees before judging. That was what she meant in that phrase that never left me. Where your attention rests, there your time will be born. My time had landed there, between memory and the present, and for the first time, I understood what it truly means to be alive. It's not surviving death, it's waking up within life itself. I stood there until the sun shifted its angle and dissolved the golden glow on the ground. When I stood to leave, I felt something say goodbye. Not sadly, but gratefully. The presence gently withdrew, as if to say, "It's your turn now." I walked along the sidewalk as the wind lifted dry leaves and swirled them in brief spirals. Everything was in motion, and every detail seemed to carry a code I could finally read. The world was no longer a place I needed to understand, but a place I could converse with. Before crossing the street, I looked back one last time. The building's facade glinted in the sun, and for a moment I thought I heard a distant sound, not sirens, but something deeper, like a murmur coming from the air itself. There were no words, just vibration. But within it I recognized the message. The light never left. We were the ones who learned to see it. I continued walking slowly, with the light step of someone who finally understood that the true return does not happen when we open our eyes, but when we begin to see. If this story touched you in any way, take a deep breath before leaving. Sometimes, we watch something like this and feel a chill, an old memory awakening, and that's no coincidence. It's our consciousness remembering that there's something beyond what meets the eye. Here in Echoes from the Other Side, each story is a bridge between what is human and what is eternal. They are voices that have crossed the line between life and the impossible, and returned with something to teach us. If you felt this truth vibrate within you today, leave your like now. This helps this message reach more people who need to hear the same reminder, that the light never left. And if you're not part of this journey yet, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The next stories go even deeper. Some of them reveal what science can't explain, but the heart understands effortlessly. Continue the journey now. The next video is already appearing below. I died for 14 minutes, and what I saw destroyed my atheism. The story of a man who crossed the same threshold, but returned completely transformed. Watch until the end. Because sometimes the answer you're looking for isn't in the sky. It's in the next story.